Hi, listeners. Welcome to Grief Out Loud. Remember the last time you tried to talk about grief and suddenly everybody left the room? Grief Out Loud is opening up this often avoided conversation because grief is hard enough without having to go through it alone. We bring you a mix of personal stories, tips for supporting children, teens, and yourself, and interviews with professionals in the grief world. Platitude and cliche-free, we promise. Grief Out Loud is hosted by me, Jana DeCristofaro, and produced by Dougie Center, the National Grief Center for Children and Families in Portland, Oregon. A lot of us talk about having a favorite person. And the stereotype is that our person is likely the person we are in a romantic relationship with. But there are a lot of different constellations of who qualifies as our person. Our people are often primary planets in our personal galaxies, and sometimes they are the sun, the person that all the other planets orbit. Sometimes they're the gravitational pull that helps keep us grounded and connected. And when that person dies, our entire galaxy gets upended. We lose the predictable patterns and interactions that directed our lives up to that point. For Dr. Julie Shaw, that person, her favorite person, was her sister, Jennifer. Jennifer was Dr. Shaw's older sister, someone she looked up to as brave and strong and kind and loving. Jennifer died of lupus in February of 2020, just before the pandemic took hold here in the United States. Her sister's death left Dr. Shaw trying to figure out who she was and how their family would function without Jennifer, who was a daughter, a mother, a nurse practitioner, and as Julie describes her, the glue of their family. In traversing her personal grief, Dr. Shaw decided she wanted to create a community for others to feel supported and understood. From this, she created Hello, I'm Grieving, a social media account where she shares openly about her grief while also inviting others to share theirs. In our conversation, we talk about what made Jennifer Dr. Shaw's favorite person and what it's meant to start Hello, I'm Grieving. We also talk about how grief is changing their family dynamics, the interplay of grief and Dr. Shaw's work as an equity and inclusion consultant, and what it means to become more confident in our grief. Okay, here's my conversation with Dr. Julie Shaw. Dr. Julie Shaw, thank you so much for joining me for Grief Out Loud today. I'm excited to talk with you and learn more about Hello, I'm Grieving.
Thank you. As I said before, I'm super excited to be here. If there's any part of my story that can help somebody out, then I'm here for that.
Let's start with kind of what brought you to this project and to this work, and that's your sister Jennifer, who died in February of 2020. And, you've described her as your favorite person. And I wondered, could you share a little bit about what made her your favorite?
Yeah, I can just say, people talk about their siblings, and sometimes you hear sibling rivalry or the fights that you got in growing up. And my sister and I would always say that we were different in that sense, that we never really fought. We never really, went through that rivalry, even though she would say that I was the favorite. And she was, for the most part, she was okay with that, I guess. And she just was my favorite person and still is, because even realizing now just how she was the glue that kept our family together, how she persevered through everything in life. She passed away from lupus, which is an autoimmune disease, and she was diagnosed with that at the age of 16. And so seeing how she dealt with that, and also how she just raised her two kids, and at a time she was a single mother, pursued her education. She was just such a good role model, really the best sister that you can ask for. That was what you think of, that what you would want. Somebody there to be your friend, somebody there to help you whenever you call, whenever you need them, to care for you, to support you, just to love you for who you are and every part of who you are. Yeah. What's not to like about that? And have, if you have your person, it's kind of like on Grey's Anatomy, where Meredith and Christina, how they have that relationship of that's my person when she was alive, and even now she still is.
Well, and Sometimes, when you think about the people in our lives who have died, we miss, who they were and how they inspired us and what they contributed to the world and to us. And sometimes we miss how they knew us. And I wonder, like, how did your sister know you in a way that maybe other people don't?
Gosh, this is why you do what you do. That's a really great question. um, yeah, and I think even as you ask that, I'm asking myself in my head and thinking, yeah, how would she see me? How would she view me? I can recall. This is actually a story that I've kind of posted about on Hello, I'm Grieving. Is when my sister was in the hospital, there was a moment when she told me, "You're such a good person." That was something that I always struggled with, to where I would always be very self judgmental. I'd be hard on myself, perfectionist, all the different ways you can call it. And would always wonder, am I good enough? Or even the pressures that I felt to succeed. She, again, was able to see that in me. And even hearing it from her, I think that really affirmed and gave me the ability and permission to see myself as a good person and to really own that and to step into it. So I'm really grateful that she saw me that way. And especially, she's known me since birth. So she probably would be able to be the best judge of that. I think she also saw me as an interesting person because we were also opposites. My sister might be the introvert of our family, a little bit more introverted. However, once you got talking to her, she would be really social. And then people might label me as an extrovert. I think even as I am publicly grieving, right? She would always say, "Gosh, you're doing all these different things and amazing things." And yes, it was also due to her lived experience is very different than mine, to where she did leave the house at 18. She did raise two kids on her own. She did put herself through school. And that changes a person, that defines a person, that also allows for different experiences. And so, where I did go to school on a scholarship, I did play collegiate basketball and was able to play professionally and travel the world, where those were different experiences that we just had. And again, just speaking to the character of who she was, she never, indicated in any way that she was jealous or that she coveted, that, or held anything against me because of that. And it really allowed me to be myself and to know that I was supported even by her. And I also think that she would view me as a risk taker to where I was willing to, try new things, try different careers. Maybe that's something that she would want to try too. But I will always say, like, as much as I feel like she, quote unquote, I'm doing the air quotes with my hands right now, looked up to me in that sense, I for sure thought she was the better person. I looked up to her in so many different ways. She was also a nurse practitioner. Just the fact that I'm like, "You're saving lives," that compares to nothing to what I do on a basketball court or anything along those lines, or no matter how many people I might meet or experiences that I have, that you're doing something quite amazing. And that's one thing with grief is I always question, does she really understand how I saw her?
I was just thinking, you talked about kind of looking up to your sister as someone whose work was contributing to other people's lives so directly by helping save their lives. And after your sister died, you're inspired to start, your work with Hello, I'm Grieving, which is also now making a difference in people's lives directly. And I just wonder if you could talk a little bit about the project, the work, kind of what inspired you to start it, and just a little bit about it.
Yeah, I think even looking back, going to when I was talking about how my sister said, "You're such a good person." And that's really stuck with me to the point of, how can I really live that? How can I um, keep her spirit living on. And I feel like we're doing this together. That's one thing that I've noticed is I feel like I'm doing this with her. And it's another way that through my grief, I can still experience her, do something with her, create something with her, and serve other people. I think she saw that in me, that I was always someone who wanted to serve others, and I did it in a different way than she did. And so with Hello, I'm Grieving, it really, I feel like I can remember the moment where that phrase just came to me. I was walking, on the sidewalk outside of my house. And it was kind of like, hello, I'm grieving, like to myself. But it was also just that claiming of that identity to really just say, yeah, I'm grieving, and really saying hello to that, acknowledging the grief in that moment. And I felt that it had some freedom in that. And it kind of had this feeling where if I could accept it, acknowledge it, welcome it, and really understand it's going to be a part of my life from here on out. And also wondering why there's some shame in that. Why again, and this is probably a reoccurring theme that you hear from folks, is why aren't we talking about it? So I'm grateful for podcasts like this. And just, how could I reach other people? And of course, in this day and age, I was like, Instagram, sure, let's let's start there. Of course, I'm a big vision person, and I have a big vision for Hello, I'm Grieving. However, I knew at that point in my grief, that's all I could handle. And I also had listened to another social media outlet, and they talked about how, yes, some people will start posting about their grief. And they recommended, don't tell anyone, just start it, use it to where you can explore your own grief and then see where it goes. Because sometimes it just falls off. It's another way that we can, manage our grief, cope with our grief. So I tried it. I said, okay, I'm not going to tell anyone that I'm doing this. I'm just going to start posting and see where it takes me. And so when I started doing it, I was just consumed with it. And I just found another type of, outlet that I felt like by giving back to other people, talking about it more, adding more visibility, awareness, even education to it, it allowed other people to connect. And the grief community is strong. I have loved being a part. I know that sounds, out of sorts. I love being a part of the grief community, but it is a very strong, supportive community from my experience thus far. And I think that's even with the title of it, right? Is how am I saying hello to other people? How am I saying, hello, I'm grieving too? And for other people to see that, in me, and for me to see it in them, it's another form of connection. So it really is this connection with other people. And at the root of it and at the foundation of it, it's the connection to my sister.
So on your Instagram account, you share other people's stories, your stories, other aspects of grief. And I'm wondering, in that, has there been a part of your grief that you've been the most maybe hesitant or fearful about kind of going public with?
Oh gosh, yes. That is, it was very fearful in the beginning to just talk about my experience with my sister because, and I'll be honest, there's still some times where I question, will people judge me for this? And I'm still working out where all that comes from, even though I have a good idea. And it really does start with the visibility and openness that our culture, our society has surrounding grief. But most recently, which I'm still kind of dipping my toe in and kind of putting myself out there, because I did, when I started it, I wanted to be authentic. Like I couldn't do this without being honest. And I knew that was going to push me outside my comfort zone. But, most recently, my wife and I have been trying to have a baby. And so there's a lot wrapped up into that. It's something that we knew could have its challenges. But right now, it's this process of where we've been trying for probably close to 2 years now. And where I've never really known about infertility. I'm looking back and I see so many parallels. I'm like, nobody taught us about grief, even though we know that people are going to pass away and die. And nobody taught us about possible infertility problems or these type of women's health issues. Even though we know that women are having babies and it's hush hush when women aren't having babies, right? And how it can be done in so many different ways and what it's like for different partners out there that are trying to make this happen. So that's where I'm pushing myself. That's where I'm even learning more about that. And I'm joining different infertility groups, which have been helpful just as much as my grief groups have been helpful. I'm also just seeing the parallels with, that there is grief and infertility and seeing the intersections there. So that's been something very new. And again, just as much as I've been talking about my grief, there have definitely been people who can identify with infertility as well. So that's one that it is a little bit scary jumping into. But again, it's really one of the taglines that I have is, and that I've learned throughout my life, is when you share your story, it allows other people to share theirs. And so I just want to help people, get the strength to share.
And to broaden kind of like what the label of grief and loss encompasses, that it's not just the fact that we've had people in our lives die, even though that's what this show is so focused on, but there's so many other losses that don't get a lot of airtime as well. And so appreciating bringing the grief and the loss of infertility into this realm as well. And you mentioned culture, like our culture, and then you mentioned intersections. And I think about the idea that, your other work has been in being a consultant for diversity and equity and inclusion, and wondering, like, what do you see as the interplay and the overlap between that work and grief?
Oh, so much. Grief has opened my eyes to so many things. That's where grief has actually added to my life, when sometimes we think grief takes away. And of course, by no means would I have wanted to learn all these lessons or learn, oh yeah, sure, great. That's a great addition to have that happen the way that it did. And with that said, it has intersected with the work that I do. So, I'm a leadership consultant where I do have an emphasis on diversity, equity, and inclusion. And as I have been going into these different companies and talking with different leaders within these organizations, I can't help, as I'm talking about intersection of race, intersection of, family dynamics, intersections of financial ability, how can I ignore the grief? Just like, right? Hello, I'm grieving. That is now a part of my identity. And that will be with me throughout my life, and how these different pieces of our identity can change. But with that intersection happening, I just see, even, culturally, what does it look like to grieve? For me, I'm half Black and Filipino, and I'm an American. So it's like, what does that look like in America? What does grief look like globally? What does, grief look like in the Filipino culture versus the Black culture? And seeing how that arises. Or I was just writing today about and asking the question, where are the men in this grief space? Because even looking at the intersection with grief and gender, I can't help but ignore a majority of the people who follow are women. When I was taking when I was becoming certified to be a grief educator, and this is me with identity, I always ask the question, I'm like, does anybody else do this when they get on a big Zoom call? I automatically scroll to see, one, are there people that look like me, identifying as a Black woman? And then I also look at, are there any men, the people that identify as men in the group? And it's kind of slim to none. And so even those things, that how I'm looking at, how am I more aware, where is grief showing up? Where do people feel more comfortable to express their grief? What are the different cultural celebrations or, practices that people do? surrounding death and grief and loss. And I find that interesting. So when I go into these corporations, even in organizations, say I'm teaching leaders about empathy, right? There's a lot of empathy that leaders should have in the workplace, not, and especially with it being a lot of work from home and virtual. People are quite literally in each other's homes now, and they're learning a lot more about them. And, compound that with a pandemic and everything else that's going on in the world, whether it's social justice, or different, shootings that are happening, that people are coming and carrying different emotional burdens. And how, as leaders, are we seeing that in the workplace and then supporting them? So I know that was a long-winded question. Like I get really passionate about it, especially now that these two worlds are colliding, because I see things through a whole different lens now. I see people through a whole different lens, and I want to continue to increase my awareness, but then also help other people do that as well, to think about things in a different way.
Well, it's a really big question, so it deserves maybe a whole episode.
I was going to
Makes
say
sense that it would take some time.
Yeah.
And as you're talking, I think too about there's the idea that we don't have one culture, so it's hard to say our culture, but like in general, grief doesn't always have a lot of space in our current world. And that's like literal space and then also abstract space. And I think about folks who, for a variety of reasons, don't have access to the physical time and space to be in their grief. People who do not have time off of work, people who possibly, are working two jobs at the same time and there's no way to schedule a time off from that, or childcare responsibilities, or other obstacles that stand in the way based on different aspects of our identity. So that is a big question that deserves a very long answer. So I appreciate you trying to succinctly get into it.
Oh, I mean, I love even hearing that come from you, because in my head, I'm like, you get it. Like you understand this. And even those things that you just said, I'm like, yeah, I might not have said it like that, but I've thought about like, what does that look like? And some of those things you said, yeah, I haven't thought about that. And I need to, again, draw more awareness. And I just love how you said, whether they have the time and space, and if they are juggling two different jobs, and will their employers be able to show them some grace and empathy with that, and understand, how can I support them so that, and I hate to say this, but it's if they can't see that side of it. And sometimes I have to talk in these terms to some leaders where I'm like, okay, some people will push back and they'll say, well, Julie, we need to get the job done. We need to reach these goals. And I'll, gently push back, and I'll just say, hey, you work with people. So if you aren't investing the time to understand the people you work with, and support them to help them thrive, then how is it going to be a success?
I wanted to hop back to something you mentioned earlier in our conversation about your sister and her being kind of the glue of your family. And, this is something a lot of people run into when someone in their life dies, is that the family dynamic can change so drastically. And I wonder, how did that play out for you and your family?
I think it's still playing out. I think this is something that a lot of families may experience, because people are going to react to a death and a loss in many different ways. That's one thing that I didn't think about, and at first I was judgmental of the way other people in my family were grieving. And on top of that, judging my own grief. So that dynamic comes up. But then again, through my certification and educating myself, is not to judge, right? And I think that's where a lot of relationships actually break down, not necessarily because of the grief that people are holding, but it's the judgment of each other's grief. And so that really resonated with me, to where I had to pull back and just respect that it's going to show up in different ways, and people are coping with it in different ways, and that's okay. And so, with the family, I think how it's playing out right now is I'm trying to figure out, so then by default, do I need to be the glue now? where I said my sister was the best big sister, to where she did do everything. She did take care of me and she took care of other people. So now whose responsibility is that? And I do feel the pressure of that has to be me. And, my sister has two kids and they're in their early 20s. And I know these are very formative years for them. And how do I not try to be like their mom and still be me and still help them? Their mom was their everything and their mom was always there. And how can I communicate to them in the way that they want to be communicated to? How can I help them and support them in ways that maybe their mom did for them, but I guess do it in my own way. Like I've always been their aunt. I've always been a part of their life. It's just, I feel like the role has changed and I haven't quite figured out where I fit in to that role. Same thing with my parents is, they were raised so differently culturally. My dad is from the South in Louisiana and my mom is an immigrant from the Philippines. I kind of think in both of those cases, no matter where they came from globally, is that they don't talk about it. And so that was hard for me to understand what's the dynamic there. I'm the child and they're the parent, and understanding, I lost a sister, they lost a daughter, the impact of that. And then also, well, I still need my parents to be there for me when maybe they can't or they don't know how. And how can I also be there for them when, same thing, I don't know how, and trying to figure all of that out. So right now that's what plays out in my head a lot, is how can I help support, which is interesting because I do often feel that how can I so openly support strangers in the Hello, I'm Grieving community? But when it comes close to home, that offers me a lot more challenges there.
It can be so much more charged with the people that we're closest to. Like, I think that's what the success of support groups can be, is that you come together with people you don't know and you don't have to talk to about family dinner or grocery shopping or anything else after you sit down for an hour and a half and share kind of maybe some of your deepest emotional heartbreak. You don't have to then deal with logistics or other historical dynamics with them.
True. Yeah. Those historical dynamics are real because, you have that family history where there's so many other things that were causing conflict when that person was alive. So then now, and even say for my sister, when those family challenges were happening, that's the first person I would call that just knew me, that understood. I didn't have to explain anything. I didn't have to ask for advice outwardly. It was just being there, that you just knew instinctually that if I just call my sister, she's going to know. And it's going to be okay. And just having that type of support. Now, when that's removed, then what do you do? How do you process it? How are you able to communicate with your other family members without that person?
Well, you made two really great points. The first is around how quick we can be to judge other people's grief while simultaneously judging ourselves, which I sometimes think those things are interconnected in a way that as we become more confident in the way that we're grieving, the more capacity we have to make space for the ways other people are grieving that's different than us. And that early on in the process, if we're feeling lost and unmoored and a little insecure about how we're doing it, we want other people to be doing it the way we're doing it so that we feel better about it. And then once we're like, oh, this is mine, you can have yours, that makes it a little easier. And then the second part you mentioned is that family dynamics change, and they change because the roles we play in the family have to change to accommodate the absence of the person who played a particular role. And so there's those two things happening, those historic family dynamics, but then also maybe stepping into a different aspect or role, which is a big learning curve for a lot of people and can cause a lot of challenge and conflict. So, in your work with Hello, I'm Grieving, There's also Hello, You're Grieving, because you are on the receiving end of people sharing their stories of grief with you. And I wonder, what has it been like to be witness to those stories?
Oh gosh. Uh, Forgive me if anybody has been on my page and I haven't said hello to you, but I do make it a point that every time I see a person follows, I send them a message and I do say hello. And I do get people that are very surprised that an actual real person said something to them. And I think it breaks the walls down and it shows that connection, which I'm happy if it does. And people will share their story. They'll even just give me a little bit of a background, and share the life of their person. And for me, it sometimes I will say it does get heavy, and so I have to monitor that, to for my own wellness and mental health as well. But I have found the good in it. And it motivates me. And when people do that, I'll tell them, I'm like, thank you. I'm like, this is going to motivate me to keep going on, or when I'm having grief days. But to see how other people are grieving and how simply this need for connection is big, especially even going back to the family dynamics or even friend dynamics where they may not be getting it from the people in their lives. How can this be an outlet where they can? And I encourage people, as they're commenting, say hello to other people and realize, it's not only hello, I'm grieving, hello, you're grieving, but hello, we're grieving. When they share those stories, it shows me the vastness of grief. It shows me the depth of grief. It shows me that there's still joy in grief, because some people, they'll be delightful when and you think some people will all be sad or diminished, but there are some people that are still, celebrating life, finding joy. They're integrating that within their grief process. So that's also really good to see.
And Jill, you mentioned that, there's times when it gets heavy being with other people in their grief, but just carrying your own grief as well. And I wonder, what's helping you recently?
Good question. I think I think it is the community. I really think it is the community showing a need for this. They're showing, that it's helping them. People will say that, thank you for posting about this. Thank you for talking about this. Or some people are like, thank you for just listening. And, to where I know I don't even need to reply, but giving them that outlet. And I think that feeds my soul for sure, and it gives me that higher purpose. And like I said, connecting it back to my sister, it really feels like we're working on something together and continuing to be good people, continuing to give back to others, because that's really what she did. She was very selfless. And to be able to carry a lot of the weight of other people around her, even in her sickness, she was still thinking about others, to where I think she was in the hospital bed as she was for those last months. And I was trying to get work done simultaneously. And I was sitting there in the hospital room with her. And she was just like, oh, like, because I wanted to turn off the light. And she's like, no, you can keep the light on. Like, you need to finish your work. And I'm like, no. But even it always blew my mind that even in that situation, she was still thinking about me. I mean, there are other things. Little tips are just, I schedule time for myself to where I know that I need to take purposeful time off. And there are times when I have said to the community that, like, hey, especially when I found out that my second IVF transfer didn't work, I had to take a break. And I let people know, like, hey, I need to take a grief break and it's really heavy right now. So I'm gonna, be gone for a minute. And then I will come back. I'll be rejuvenated so that I can continue to give more. So it is about that intentionality and knowing, where do I need to take a pause.
For listeners who are intrigued and want to connect with your community of Hello, I'm Grieving, what's the best place for them to find you?
Yeah, I would love for people to say hello. I'd love to meet you all. You can find me at Hello I'm Grieving on Instagram. And then I also have a website, which is www.helloimgrieving.com. So pretty easy to remember. It's pretty consistent. and I'll be, creating more things. The vision is to create more meetups, to where we can even do surfing grief groups. I am here in LA, and been talking about doing that and hosting it, or different grief walks, providing more resources, and then ultimately creating a grief awareness brand where people can. I wear a bag out. So I wear a bag out that my sister-in-law made, and it says, "Hello, I'm grieving" on it in all big, bold print. And sometimes I do it for a little bit of shock value. But I will say, I also do it because I do want visibility. I do want awareness, and I do want education. And I felt like, even continuing to even build a grief awareness brand as I'm figuring all this out in my head as I go is, yeah, if people can see it, and they're confronted with it, then what is their response? And I've gotten, like, I cannot tell you, every time I wear that bag out, somebody identifies with it. And it hasn't been met with like, "Oh my gosh, I can't believe, she has that." It's more so like, I'm grieving too. And it allows other people to then connect in that way and say hello. So a lot of things coming down the pipeline. So I really hope other people are open to joining the community and being there to support, as I will be there to support you.
Well, that bag would solve the perennial conversation that comes with a lot of consternation in so many of our groups, which is, when and how do I tell people who don't know that someone in my life has died? So if they could just wear a bag or a t-shirt,
Yes.
it would really take care of
Yeah.
it.
Yeah. So I have a big vision, like I said, and I can't stop thinking about it. And so I am going to hopefully take some time off to really invest in it more and to continue to grow the community.
Well, Dr. Julie Shaw, thank you for the work that you're doing, for, continuing on kind of the legacy of your sister in this work, and for taking time to talk with me and to share with our listeners. I really appreciate your time.
Thank you so much. And I hope it's helped at least one person out there. That's always my goal, whenever I share. So thank you again for having me on.
And listeners, I say it each and every time, but thank you for being part of our community, for making this show mean what it does. If you would like to reach out to me directly, you can email me at griefoutloud@dougy, dougy.org. That's also our website, dougy.org, where you can find all of our past episodes, as well as all of our free downloadable resources and more information about our local programming. So thanks again for listening, and we hope you'll join us again next time.